Okay, strap in, everybody. We're going deep on child support and family law today.
Ooh, yeah. And we've got a ton of stuff to dig through this time.
We really do. Legal stuff, like the 2025 Michigan Child Support Formula Supplement.
Sounds riveting.
It's actually way more interesting than you'd think. We also have some pretty strong opinions from people like Dr. Umar Johnson.
Yeah, he always has something to say.
And we can't forget Russell Brand. Plus, we'll hear from Curtis Bauer, who's a big advocate for shared parenting.
So, like, the whole spectrum of perspective.
Exactly. It's going to be a wild ride, but hopefully by the end, we'll all have a clearer picture of how this whole system works.
And maybe even spark some aha moments along the way.
I'm counting on it. I have to admit, though, just looking at all this material, it's a bit overwhelming.
I feel you. Where do you even begin?
Right. Well, I was thinking maybe we start with the nuts and bolts, like how child support is actually calculated.
Good idea. The Michigan Child Support Formula Supplement breaks it all down, and it's pretty complex.
More complex than just, like, taking a percentage of someone's income.
Way more. It factors in both parents' incomes, how many kids there are, healthcare costs, even childcare expenses.
Wow. Okay, so it's pretty thorough. What about, like, how much time each parent spends with the kids? Does that play a role?
Definitely. That's what they call parenting time, and it gets factored in through the parental time offset.
So the more time you spend with your kid, the less you might have to pay.
Potentially, yeah. The logic is that if you have the kids more, you're probably covering more of their daily expenses, so the support payments adjust accordingly.
That makes sense, but it also seems really hard to, like, measure accurately,
Totally. And it brings up a bigger question. Does this formula really work for all types of parenting arrangements?
especially things like shared custody, where both parents are equally involved.
Right. Is the offset really capturing the financial reality of those situations? Something to think about.
Definitely. And you mentioned some other stuff earlier, like that low-income threshold. What's that all about?
Oh, that's a good one. So that threshold is set at $1,250, and it's basically there to protect lower income parents
Protect them from what?
from being hit with child support payments they simply can't afford.
Oh, I see, like a safety net.
Exactly. Think about someone working a minimum wage job. They're already struggling, and this prevents them from being completely crushed by a child support order.
That's good. It seems like they've tried to build in some safeguards.
Yeah, they've considered a lot of different factors. Like,
Yeah.
they even factor in average ordinary medical expenses when calculating child support.
Ordinary medical expenses. What does that even mean?
Basically, it's the cost of things like doctor's visits, prescriptions, dental care, those everyday health costs.
Ah, so they're trying to account for the fact that kids get sick, need checkups, all that.
Precisely. They use these averages to get a baseline idea of how much those things typically cost.
But I'm guessing those costs can vary wildly depending on where you live and the kid's health.
Right. For sure. And that makes you wonder, does a simple average really reflect the needs of a child with, like, a chronic illness or a disability?
Yeah, that's a good point. It feels like we could go down a million rabbit holes with this. But I'm still trying to wrap my head around how all these factors actually play out in a real-life situation. Can we maybe walk through an example?
Sure. Let's say parent A makes $3,000 a month and parent B makes $2,000. They share parenting time equally, so it's a 50-50 split.
Okay, so even though their incomes are different, the fact that they share the kids equally, that matters.
Huge. The formula crunches those income numbers first and then adjusts based on that parenting time split. In this case, parent A would probably still pay some child support.
Even though they make more.
Yeah, but it would be significantly less than if parent B only had the kids, like 30% of the time.
Oh, okay, so it's trying to balance things out.
Exactly. It's trying to make sure the financial support reflects the reality of how much each parent is actually contributing to the kid's life.
Gotcha. It's a lot more nuanced than I initially thought.
And we're just scratching the surface. Speaking of nuances, remember we were talking about shared parenting?
Yeah, Curtis Bauer and all that.
Well, he's a veteran who's really become a powerful voice for shared parenting, where both parents have roughly equal time with the kids.
I've heard some people say that's actually the best arrangement for kids, at least in certain situations.
Yeah, and he points to studies suggesting that kids in shared parenting situations might have better emotional well-being and fewer behavioral issues.
Interesting. But isn't shared parenting pretty common these days anyway?
It's definitely becoming more common, but Bauer argues that many states' laws, like in Iowa, for example, still favor sole custody arrangements.
Really? So the laws haven't quite caught up to the changing dynamics of families.
Exactly. He thinks the system needs a major overhaul to truly support shared parenting.
That's a pretty bold statement. But how does that tie back to the formula we were just talking about?
That's the million-dollar question. Does a formula designed around one primary custodian really work when both parents are equally responsible for the kids?
Hmm, that's a good point. It seems like just having a formula, no matter how complex, might not be enough. We need to look at the whole picture, right?
Exactly. Family dynamics, different parenting models, it's not one size fits all.
And speaking of challenging assumptions, we also have these pretty intense claims from that Common Ground video.
Oh boy, yeah.
They make some serious allegations about Child Protective Services.
Like really serious stuff, abuse, even suggestions of child trafficking.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff. And to be clear, the video doesn't offer any hard evidence to back up those claims.
Right, it's important to remember that.
But even without taking those claims as fact, it does make you think about the role of CPS and the potential for things to go wrong.
Absolutely. It raises questions about government overreach, transparency, accountability, all those big important concepts.
And how do we balance protecting kids with respecting parents' rights? Where's the line?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. It's a tough conversation, but one we need to have.
For sure. And speaking of control, we also have Russell Brand weighing in on government control of social media, all in the name of child safety, of course.
Oh, right. He's coming at it from a totally different angle, focusing on free speech and censorship.
He's basically saying, hey, be careful about giving the government too much power over what we can say online.
Even if it's supposedly to protect kids.
Which, of course, is a noble goal.
Yeah.
But Brand's point is that good intentions can sometimes lead to unintended consequences.
Exactly. It makes you think twice about who gets to control the narrative, right?
It definitely does.
And
This is getting
I'm gonna
deep.
dive, remember.
Right. But seriously, we've got these complex formulas, passionate arguments for shared parenting, unsettling claims about CPS, and now concerns about censorship.
It's a lot.
It is. But hopefully it's giving our listeners enough information to start forming their own opinions.
Yes. Do your own research, think critically, don't just take our word for it.
Love that.
Uh-huh.
We're not here to tell you what to think, just to give you some food for thought.
Yeah. Now, speaking of food for thought, let's talk about Dr. Umar Johnson.
Oh yeah, he had some strong opinions about the child support system, right?
He did. He's particularly concerned about how it impacts non-custodial parents, especially Black fathers.
I've heard him talk about that before. He argues that the system can be really unfair, especially for those struggling financially.
Exactly. He says it can trap people in a cycle of poverty, lead to incarceration, and ultimately damage the parent-child relationship.
And he doesn't shy away from pointing out the potential racial biases in the system.
No, he definitely doesn't. He's really raising some important questions about social justice and how those issues intersect with family law.
But wait, didn't we see something in that Michigan formula about being able to adjust payments if someone's circumstances change?
You're right. They do have provisions for things like disability, job loss, situations where someone genuinely can't afford the payments.
So there is some flexibility built in.
There is, but Dr. Johnson might say those provisions aren't always applied fairly or consistently.
Ah, so it's not just about what's written on paper, but how those rules are actually implemented.
Exactly. And that goes back to those power dynamics we were talking about earlier.
Man, this is complicated.
It is, but that's why we're here, right?
To dive deep. And it feels like we're just getting started.
We are. Stay tuned as we explore potential reforms, those controversial claims about CPS, and what it all means for the future of family law.
This could be good.
Buckle up. It's like, how do we make sure the system is fair, you know?
Right, exactly. How do we protect kids, but also make sure parents aren't getting screwed over?
It's tricky. And when we talk about reforms, there's always that tension between, like, what sounds good in theory.
And what actually works in real life?
Totally. So remember we talked about that percentage of income model?
Yeah, where child support is just a set percentage of the parent's income.
Seems simple, right?
On paper, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing there's more to it.
There always is. For one thing, it doesn't account for cost of living differences.
Oh, right. Like raising a kid in New York City is way more expensive than, say, rural Kansas.
Exactly. A percentage that works in one place might be totally inadequate in another.
And what about kids with special needs? Or like if a family chooses private school?
Yep, all those things can make a huge difference in how much it actually costs to raise a child.
So a simple percentage might not cut it.
Sometimes life is just too complicated for a one-size-fits-all approach.
I hear that. What about that other idea we talked about, factoring in non-monetary contributions?
Ah, yes, the holistic approach.
Sounds nice, but also kind of fuzzy.
It is. The idea is to recognize that money isn't the only thing parents contribute.
Right, like spending time with your kids, being emotionally supportive, helping with homework.
All that good stuff. But here's the catch. How do you measure that?
That's what I was thinking. Like, how do you put a dollar value on emotional support?
Right. It gets really subjective really fast.
But I can see that turning into a huge battleground for parents who are already fighting.
Totally. It's like opening a can of worms.
So while it sounds nice in theory, it might be a nightmare to actually implement.
Exactly. It's that balance, again, trying to find a way to recognize those contributions without creating a whole new set of
It
problems.
feels like we keep bumping up against that same wall. The system needs to be both fair and practical.
And flexible. We can't forget about flexibility.
True. This is making my head spin a little.
It's a lot to think about, but it highlights just how much is at stake when we talk about child support and family law.
Yeah, it's not just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about real people's lives.
Exactly, and their kids' lives. Which brings us back to those intense claims about CPS from that Common Ground video.
Oh man, that was some heavy stuff.
It was. And even though we can't verify those specific claims, it does raise some valid concerns about the power CPS has.
And how sometimes that power might be misused.
Right. Because any system with that much authority over families, there's always the potential for abuse.
The video also talked a lot about transparency and accountability within CPS.
Which are so important. We need to be able to trust that the system is working as intended.
And that if mistakes are made, there are mechanisms for correcting them.
Exactly. And for holding people accountable.
It's a tough conversation, but we can't just sweep these issues under the rug.
We can't. It's about finding that balance, making sure kids are protected from genuine harm, but also respecting parents' rights.
It's a tightrope walk, for sure.
It really is. And it requires open, honest dialogue from all sides.
Parents, child welfare workers, lawmakers, everyone needs to be part of the conversation.
That's how we find solutions that actually work.
You know, as we're talking about all this, I'm noticing a theme here: power dynamics.
Oh, yeah, big time.
It seems like in every aspect of this child support, custody, CPS involvement, there's always this inherent power imbalance.
You're totally right. And that's where things can get messy, especially if that power isn't used responsibly.
Because like you said, any system with that much power has the potential for abuse,
And for biases to creep in, conscious or unconscious.
which is why we need to be extra vigilant, extra aware of those dynamics.
And always questioning, always pushing for more transparency and accountability.
Speaking of questioning things, let's circle back to Russell Brand and his take on government control of social media.
Ah, yes. He really gets people thinking, doesn't he?
He does. And his point about censorship, even in the name of child safety, it's something we need to consider seriously.
Because it's not just about protecting kids, it's also about protecting our freedoms.
Right, like who gets to decide what's safe and what's not? Where do we draw the line?
It's a slippery slope, for sure.
And even if the intentions are good, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, as they say.
Exactly. So we need to be very cautious about giving anyone, even the government, too much control over what we can say and see online.
Because once that door's open, it's hard to close it again.
That's the thing about power, isn't it?
It's a double-edged sword.
For sure. And it's not just the government we need to be wary of.
You're right. Social media companies themselves have a huge amount of power these days.
They really do. They're shaping our perceptions, controlling the flow of information.
And it's all happening behind these algorithms that we don't fully understand.
It's a bit scary when you think about it.
It is. It feels like we're just starting to grasp the full implications of all this.
We are, and it's a conversation that's just beginning.
But I think this deep dive has been a good starting point, at least for me.
Me too. It's helped to connect the dots between all these different issues.
Child support, family law, social media, government control. It's all connected in ways we might not have realized before.
Exactly. And that's the power of looking at things from multiple angles.
So where do we go from here? What do we do with all this information?
Well, first of all, don't get overwhelmed. It's a lot to process, but just being aware of these issues is a huge step.
Yeah, knowledge is power. But what about taking action?
There are definitely things you can do. Get involved with advocacy groups, contact your elected officials.
Right, make our voices heard.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of your own story. Sharing your experiences, even just with friends and family, can make a difference
It can raise awareness, spark conversations.
and hopefully lead to positive change.
It feels like we've only scratched the surface of this whole thing.
We have, but that's what makes it so fascinating, right?
It is. There's so much more to explore, so much more to learn.
And so much work to be done. But hey, We've got to start somewhere.
We do. This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about.
Me too. And hopefully our listeners are feeling the same way.
It's a lot, you know? Like, where do we even go from here?
I know, right? It can feel kind of overwhelming.
Totally. Like, we've uncovered all this complexity, but what can we actually do about it?
Well, first of all, don't underestimate the power of just being informed.
Yeah, knowledge is power and all that.
Exactly. The more we understand these issues, the better equipped we are to advocate for change.
That's true, but advocating for change in a system this big, it seems daunting.
It can be, but there are things we can do, like connecting with advocacy groups that align with our values.
Oh, right, like those shared parenting groups we talked about?
Exactly. Or groups pushing for child support reform, or more accountability from CPS. There are tons of them out there.
That makes sense. Finding strength in numbers and all that.
And then there's always reaching out to our elected officials.
Do they really listen, though?
They should. It's
Yeah.
literally their job to represent us. So call them up, write them emails, go to town halls.
Make our voices heard.
Exactly. And remember, personal stories are powerful.
You mean like sharing our own experiences with the system?
Exactly. Whether it's online, at a community event, even just talking to friends and family, it all helps to raise awareness.
Because sometimes it feels like these issues are taboo, you know?
Yeah.
Like, nobody wants to talk about it.
I know it can be uncomfortable, but the more we talk openly and honestly, the better.
It breaks down the stigma.
And helps other people feel less alone.
So true. And honestly, just having this conversation, this deep dive, has been helpful for me.
Me too. It's made me realize just how much I didn't know about all this.
Same here. Like, I feel more empowered now, more equipped to navigate this whole world.
That's what we're hoping for, because ultimately it's about creating a system that works for everyone.
Kids, parents, families, everyone deserves a fair shot.
Absolutely. And we all have a role to play in making that happen.
So to our listeners out there, if this deep dive has sparked any thoughts or questions for you,
Please reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
you can find us on social media, our website, all the links are in the show notes.
Let's keep this conversation going.
This has been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It has. From child support formulas to social media censorship, we've covered a lot of ground.
But it's all connected in the end.
It is. It's all about power, about how we use it, how we balance it, how we make sure it serves the best interests of everyone involved.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up.
Yeah, I think we've given everyone enough to chew on for now.
We have. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into child support and family law.
It's been a pleasure, as always.
Until next time, stay curious, keep those minds open, and keep fighting the good fight.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.